Welcome back to another edition of Things That Matter. I'm Gary Sutton alongside of Charlie Giroux, who's running for governor here as a Republican in the state of Pennsylvania. And each week, we talk about the things that matter. And by the way, someone asked last week, do you send him the questions ahead of time? And the answer is very simply no. He knows about 1 second in advance of what we're going to talk about here just before we get on the air. So it's kind of fun to have that kind of conversation with somebody. And our whole purpose is to get you inside of a candidate talking on the spot, spontaneously, as we maybe do out in our front lawns in the morning when we're picking up the paper. So that's our purpose here on Things That Matter, because when we talk about things that matter, there are no prepared speeches out there. Anyway, we're talking today about concepts, Charlie, and we start with concepts of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And not a lot of us talk about that on a regular basis, but I was reading through it the other day, and I thought, you know what? There's a lot of good common sense stuff in here. For example, it says right in the very beginning, all power to the people, and it's founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. And I'm thinking, we the people are supposed to be putting that together for our peace, safety, and happiness, and yet there's a feeling right now for a lot of people that someone's putting it together for us. Your thoughts about that? You talk a lot about the people.
Well, this isn't rehearsed, Gary, so I'm trying to pull my recollection together. And if I recall, the Pennsylvania Constitution actually predates the U.S. Constitution. And it's been amended many times, as you know, by constitutional conventions, the last one in 1968. And so we've had some changes, but they haven't been dramatic changes.
Right.
And they go back to the core concept or principle that you're talking about, which is that the government exists to protect our rights, not to give us our rights, but to protect our rights and to protect public safety, which is a big issue today and one that I think we're going to hear increasingly about during the course of this campaign.
We talk about life, liberty, and property, and I thought a lot about that and referred to it a lot in my own talk show during the COVID, the early part, and I said, is the government really protecting our property when they force us to go out of business, when they force us to put it away, when they force us to go into hiding, when they force us to lose money, when our families can't afford to make it? It seemed like government missed the whole opportunity there in terms of representing us very well. Your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously Tom Wolfe and this government did. They failed us miserably, and Josh Shapiro was right there alongside him as his legal hatchet man in these arbitrary and capricious lockdowns, shutdowns, edicts, and mandates. He didn't consult with the legislature, the elected representatives of the people. He didn't consult with anybody other than himself. He thought he was a king, and that really runs exactly contrary to the concept or the principles laid out in our Constitution. Liberty is at the core. Individual freedom is right there. And so when you depart from that, you really have made not only a serious policy mistake, but you've really run contrary to what our founders intended.
You talk about liberty and freedom, Charlie, and there are so many people watching this around the state, both liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, who are saying to themselves, okay, we're questioning some of the concepts upon which our society was built, maybe even the constitutions at times. But one of the things that's been questioned a lot has been capitalism. Does it really work? And we're seeing a lot of socialistic tendencies in the government right here in Pennsylvania, for example, where people are saying redistribution is the way to go. And other people are saying, wait a minute, capitalism gives us a chance to achieve freedom beyond our wildest dreams. Your thoughts on both those?
Well, I celebrate capitalism, Gary, and I believe that it is the best economic system the world has ever known. And as for socialism and the progressive left and all that kind of stuff, I often love to quote my old boss, Ronald Reagan, who said, socialism only works in two places: heaven, where they don't need it, and hell, where they've already got it.
Somebody once said that socialism is good as long as you have other people's money to work with. When you run out, that's when people kind of lose track of it.
That was Margaret Thatcher. You know, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money to spend. And, you know, Winston Churchill's famous quote about it being the gospel of envy, and or the doctrine of envy and the gospel of greed, I think really gets at the core of it. Socialism is unfortunately the shared misery of all.
You're talking about envy, though. A lot of people play on that right now in political parties to get votes. And they say, okay, yeah, you're getting cheated. These people are out there. They're all rich. They're building on your backs. And yet there is a lot of people, you go out there, and I'm sure you meet a lot of them across the state of Pennsylvania as you're traveling around right now, who have built up from the bottom up and have achieved, and maybe would take some umbrage with that.
They would. And Gary, the thing that I think is so important is that we give Pennsylvanians the opportunity to do that in the future, because there is a shrinking middle class, and that's not good for Pennsylvania or for the country. We've got to expand that middle class. We've got to give people who are less fortunate the opportunity, again, opportunity to achieve great success and to do better for themselves and their families and their futures. And so I think that's really the key is, as we look down the road, what can we do to provide prosperity for all by giving everybody an opportunity to do better?
As a governor, what specific things would you do to help? We hear a lot about the middle class growing up, growing down, growing out, all these different things from politicians. I'm talking to someone I think is a policy maker here. What types of things could you do for the middle class here who wants to go out there and just live and be left alone by the government and go ahead and start to build a little bit on some of the things they already have?
Well, a lot of it is increasing freedom. But the other thing that goes right along with it, Gary, is allowing people to keep more of what they earn and decide for themselves how those precious dollars are spent. When folks are sitting down at their dining room table or their kitchen table or wherever they do their family budget, I don't think too many of them are saying, my life would be a little bit better if only my taxes were a little higher.
Right.
And we're a high tax state. We've got multiplicity of taxes across everything you can imagine. I mean, we tax everything that moves, essentially. And so people feel the brunt of that, because if you tax something, you get less of it. And so we've got to get a tax policy that's much more sensible, that's much more focused on individual families and allows them to keep more of what they earn. And I think that would be the great generator of economic success for so many that right now are struggling.
Excuse me for interrupting, but we talk about capitalism. It's become a dirty word to some in this country, and they'll say, well, as I said earlier, we're kind of getting screwed over. We're getting the brunt of everything, and it's all because of that guy up there. It's that envy you talked about. How do you talk to people who are so ingrained with this idea of the government owes me something, and the government will even the field for me a little bit, and they'll equal opportunity, not just equal opportunity, but equal outcomes, which is the biggest lie that we could possibly have?
Well, I think part of it, Gary, is that so many in our schools are teaching that capitalism is a zero-sum game, meaning that for every winner, there's a loser. And that's just not the case.
Right.
We can have win, 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 and that's the way it should work. And if people are given the opportunity, their hard work, and Pennsylvanians are hardworking, their entrepreneurial drive and spirit, and there are a lot of folks out there, creating little businesses in a spare bedroom or in their basement, wanting to move them onto Main Street, and who knows, maybe someday to Wall Street. I think we've got to encourage that. And so when we do, I think you'll see economic success for a lot more people, because it's not a zero-sum game. It is very, very possible to have winner after winner after winner.
I get into semantic gymnastic battles with people who say, we don't have a democracy. I'll say, we have a representative democracy. They say, no, we don't. I say, yes, we do. That's what a republic is. A lot of people are questioning today, again, in society, many who are questioning capitalism are also questioning the very idea of a representative democracy. They say it's all fixed, it's governed by a few people. Your thoughts about that and what we can do to maybe get rid of that perception and get back to them. It's a government of the people, and we are simply choosing people to represent our views.
Well, I like quotes. And there's that famous quote by Benjamin Franklin when he was asked, what have you given us? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. Yeah. And I think that is the eternal quest, because freedom isn't free. And as you know, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So we've got to be very, very careful about protecting individual liberty, protecting personal freedom, and by so doing, letting people take the opportunities that are out there and avail themselves of them.
We're talking with Charlie Giroux this morning, who is a Republican candidate for governor here in the state of Pennsylvania. You talked about eternal vigilance, and that's laid out in our Constitution here in the Commonwealth, and it says, quote, inalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such manner as they may think proper. We put up with an awful lot of stuff as the people. I think sometimes we forget the fact that we're the government and that we can change things. We hear people use that word change an awful lot in the state of Pennsylvania as well as around the country. But in terms of standing up for what we really believe in, we need to remember that we can change those things right now. And I think a lot of Pennsylvanians are kind of itchy to do exactly that at the moment. Talk about the kind of changes you think the people of Pennsylvania want to see.
Well, let me go back to that phrase in the Constitution, which is so important and really is at the center of our state's Constitution. I took a case, Gary, some years ago when I was still practicing law, all the way to the United States Supreme Court on that phrase alone, because some taxpayers in York County wanted to have a referendum, and they were denied that opportunity to have a referendum over a gigantic spending package that was coming down the road. I believe that they should have that right. And they were denied because the court said there wasn't a specific provision, that was a general provision, that allowed for individual initiative and referendum by the voters. So I am a great proponent, pardon me, a great proponent of initiative and referendum that would give we the people the right to take direct action when the legislature or other governments fail us.
I think it becomes the ultimate safety valve for us too, an insurance policy, if you will, that we the people can eventually step in where our representatives might be letting us down. And I think that point that you make is a very, very important one. Religious freedom. Religion has been under an attack here, particularly Christianity in the state of Pennsylvania, around the country. It says in our Constitution there in the Commonwealth, all men have a natural and indefensible right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciences. Boy, our consciences are being put under attack here on a regular basis. Talk a little bit about that concept.
Well, Pennsylvania was founded, as you know, Gary, on individual freedom and on individual religious freedom. I meant to put
with William
religious
Penn,
in there, with William Penn. And the persecutions that had come across the Atlantic, pardon me, and they wanted to put an end to that. So religious freedom is really at the core. And it's not just religious freedom, but the opportunity to practice our faiths. And doing so is so vitally important, because if you read through the Constitution and through the documents that this country was founded upon, morality, God, even Christianity were at the core of their thinking.
We talk about the COVID pandemic, and religion has been put on trial even there in terms of people asking for exemptions.
Right.
And the question is, does your freedom of religion stop at the door of the hospital, the door of the school, the door of your place of work, wherever? It has really been put under stress there, and I wanted to get a little bit of your take on that whole deal.
Well, we've seen so many liberties and freedoms put under the scalpel through the pandemic, and the overreach of government has been something that few people could tolerate, and thank God we're moving past that, I hope, at this point. But it points up again, Gary, one of the things that I've promoted throughout my campaign, which is an additional constitutional amendment at the state level that would allow the people, we the people, all of us, the opportunity to remove from office through recall any governor that thinks he or she is a king or a queen, because we simply can't deal with that kind of governor who is unchecked and has unlimited power. We restrained it a little bit through the 2 constitutional amendments that we the people passed last spring, but I think we need to go one more step.
We talk about restraint, and we talk about the Constitution was drawn up not only here in Pennsylvania, but our country's Constitution as a not an enabling document, but one that was a limiting document. You know, we don't trust government generally, and we want to have a Constitution that is the supreme law of our land and also the supreme law of Pennsylvania. We have that, and yet some treat it like it's a suggestion box to be used occasionally when it's convenient. How would you treat the Constitution here in the state?
No, I mean, we have to live by the rule of law, Gary.
Right.
If we don't, then our society completely falls apart, and we've seen a little bit of that. I mean, we really delve into anarchy if we don't have the rule of law. And the ultimate rule of law is the Constitution, and it should be. But I think it's important that you said it's an enabling document. The Constitution doesn't create our rights.
Right.
It protects our rights. Our rights come from God. And it's really the first time in history that people put down on paper that concept. You know, theretofore it had always been some king or potentate or sovereign that gave people rights. But we said, whoa. Our rights come from God, and government's function is to protect them.
And yet government seems to think that their rights come from them occasionally. We've seen a lot of that during COVID as well. And I wanted to ask you the question about rights. Where do my rights begin and end? In other words, I think there's a combination here where people are saying, well, we're going to have a mandate and we're going to take away your right to say no to having a shot in your arm or whatever it might be, or to wearing a mask. And yet at the same time, you know, we ask people, okay, can you be responsible for the people around you and so forth? Where's the middle point on that from your vantage point?
Well, my vantage point, Gary, is that you allow people the freedom to make for themselves the best decisions for themselves and their families. I think people are ultimately going to do that. They're going to do the right thing if you give them the opportunity to do that. When you try to corral them into one size fits all, I think you make a serious public policy mistake.
One final concept here before we get to the end is the right to bear arms. And, Pennsylvania is about as clear in their Constitution as it gets. It says it shall not be questioned.
It goes further than the U.S. Constitution.
Exactly right. And I know you've been a member of the NRA for a long, long time. And,
a life member.
No question about it, right?
Right. No question about it. I mean, look, the Second Amendment is there for a very, very serious reason, and in many respects it protects the other rights that we have. And on the Pennsylvania Constitution, as you correctly point out, Gary, something a lot of people don't chat about that much, but in Article 1, Section 21, it says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be questioned. Now, that was reinforced in 1968, so it wasn't,
Right.
back in, a lot of folks that don't really like the Second Amendment, well, that was way back then when people were carrying around muskets and
Sure.
things. No, this was a very, very recent affirmation of that fundamental right of the people, and it shall not be infringed, it shall not be questioned, and we have to hold that as sacrosanct.
Just some of the things that really matter that we're talking about this morning, some of the concepts that have been under question and some of the concepts that are being attacked and talked about and debated about in this country. And I know as people come up with questions, they always come back to one point. What's that phone number they can call and ask you questions about? Because you put it out there for everybody to see, and I'm going to keep reminding you every week.
My phone number, Gary, is becoming better known than I am. It's 717-877-8194. 717-877-8194. And I got to tell you, Gary, I love the calls that I'm getting. People are like, oh, don't you get all these crank calls and whatnot? I really haven't. People have been very respectful, very helpful, very kind of surprised that they're actually getting me rather than some answering service. But I said, who did you expect? If you call me, I'll take the call, I'll listen, I'll chat with you about whatever you'd like.
And in a day and age where we have to fight through red tape to get through to people, it's a pretty refreshing experience. Next week, we're going to talk about CPAC. Charlie has been involved in CPAC for a long, long time, and he's going to be heading off to Florida for that big convention, the largest convention of conservatives anywhere in the country, and he'll be there next week. We're going to talk about what CPAC's all about and what a conservative is juxtaposed to a liberal, and we'll talk about conservatism next week here on Things That Matter. I'm Gary Sutton for Charlie Giroux, who's running for governor. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone.
Businessman, conservative, patriot, Charlie Giroux for governor.